The committee will come to order. We thank our guests for being here, and we are here this morning to consider the nomination of Stephen Feinberg, who's been nominated to be Deputy Secretary of Defense. If confirmed, Mr. Feinberg would join the Department of Defense during the most dangerous security environment since World War II. He would oversee the operations of the department as it faces an emerging axis of aggressors. This dangerous coalition, which is characterized by military cooperation between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, presents a complex and far-reaching set of threats. Make no mistake, our enemies do not want a 21st century defined by peace and prosperity for the American people. Mr. Feinberg would be a crucial part of the team tasked with meeting those threats. Unfortunately, the defense investments we've made during the Cold War have long since evaporated. Defense spending is near record lows as a percentage of our gross domestic product, and all aspects of our military forces are now in dire need of repair or replacement. Our Navy, once the envy of all seafaring nations, is now too small and too old to meet the growing demands of our combatant commanders. Our nuclear forces used to be the most robust and effective on the planet. Now they are decades older than their intended service lives. Our Air Force continues to shrink. We have yet to figure out how to scale innovative weapons into mass production. We have a $200 billion backlog in basic maintenance that leaves our troops living and working in substandard conditions. $200 billion. Just dealing with living and working conditions. And I could go on. Clearly, there are many things that need fixing at the Department of Defense. Fortunately, Mr. Feinberg has spent his entire career fixing things. I believe he will make a very fine Deputy Secretary of Defense. Mr. Feinberg ran a highly successful large organization for 3 decades, making him eminently qualified to run the Pentagon effectively. He brings extensive experience at the intersection of international economics and national security. Mr. Feinberg is remarkably attuned to the scope and scale of the challenges we face, as well as the opportunities we might exploit. His work on national defense is significant and has ranged from Subic Bay acquisition to counter Huawei efforts and from spectrum sharing to hypersonic testing. Unlike the Secretary of Defense, the deputy does not often make high-profile policy speeches or travel around the world to engage with allies and adversaries. I do not expect to see much of Mr. Feinberg in the news if he is confirmed. But make no mistake, the Pentagon cannot function without a capable deputy. In many ways, the deputy runs the day-to-day operations of the department, driving the budget process, managing the principal staff assistants, and ensuring the Secretary of Defense is provided with data-driven and thoughtful options. In Mr. Feinberg, President Trump has found a deputy who combines cutting-edge private sector skills with a thorough understanding of U.S. national security interests and the Department of Defense. Today, we will hear Mr. Feinberg's views on issues facing the Department of Defense. I look forward to his thoughts on my proposals. Last year, I released a report entitled 21st Century Peace Through Strength. I hope this can serve as a blueprint to reinvigorate and rebuild our military. Additionally, I released a Pentagon Reform and Innovation Plan called Restoring Freedom's Forge, American Innovation Unleashed. I hope it brings much-needed reforms and fundamentally changes the way the department does business. We must cut red tape and get better weapons to our troops faster, all while maximizing taxpayer dollars. So I thank Mr. Feinberg and his family and his friends for being here today. I believe he has a lot to offer as the Department of Defense directs its focus to lethality, efficiency, speed, and accountability. And I now recognize my friend and ranking member Reed for any opening remarks he would like to deliver.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feinberg, congratulations on your nomination and welcome to today's hearing. I'd also like to recognize your wife, Gisela, and your family that are here today. Also, let me welcome Bill Haggerty. Senator, thank you. You'll be introducing Mr. Feinberg. Mr. Feinberg, you've been nominated to be Deputy Secretary of Defense. Traditionally, the deputy handles the day-to-day operations of the department, with a primary focus on managing the workforce and budget processes. The deputy keeps the trains running on time, but also serves as the department's main troubleshooter for high-priority problems or decisions. This, in turn, allows the secretary to focus on policy, strategy, and relationships abroad. However, I'm concerned that the deputy's primary roles, workforce and budget management, have already been undermined by the chaotic actions we have seen over the past week. Last Tuesday, Secretary Hegseth ordered the Defense Department leadership to submit plans to slash spending by 8% annually. He suggested that these cuts would be covered largely by canceling DEI and climate change programs. But I would note that these programs combined account for barely 0.1% of the annual budget. The cuts will go much, much deeper to systems, and you will be part of that process. In addition, after pressure from DOGE, Mr. Hegseth announced a plan to fire 5,400 Defense Department probationary employees beginning this week, and eventually to 5 to 8% of the entire workforce, as many as 75,000 workers across the country. Let me make one point clear. The United States' greatest national security asset is not its ships, aircraft, weapons, or technology. Our greatest security asset is our people. We have the most professional and dedicated defense workforce in the world to complement the greatest and most lethal fighting force in the world. The men and women who serve our military, both in uniform and as civilians, are among the most skilled and valuable professionals in the country. And they serve in the Department of Defense not because it's a lucrative or easy career. They do so because they care about the mission and protecting their fellow citizens. In a word, they're patriots, and they're not opponents, they're patriots. That's why I'm so disturbed by the Trump administration's apparent animosity toward them. Arbitrarily firing tens of thousands of workers and slashing the defense budget will not create efficiency in our military. It will cripple it. This committee has always advocated for cutting wasteful spending at the Department of Defense. But tough budget decisions should be based on facts and analysis, not reckless layoffs. Such actions will harm our economy and industrial base and will be felt in every state, not just inside the Pentagon. Defense civilians work in communities around the country, at shipyards, military bases, depots, manufacturing sites, schools, and research centers. Mr. Feinberg, if you are confirmed, you will be responsible for managing the fallout from these budget and personnel cuts. At a time when we face unprecedented threats from China, Russia, and other adversaries, you will need to find a way to balance these reductions while also ensuring the department has the resources it needs to achieve current missions and invest in modern technology. You will need the expertise of these civilians who now are in the fear of losing their jobs without cause, or you will have to rely on contractors or military personnel to fill their cover work, which in the past has proved only to degrade readiness and drive up costs. I hope you will explain to this committee how you intend to resolve these contradictory demands while ensuring the Department of Defense accomplishes its mission. Finally, I feel compelled to take a moment to address the firings of senior military leaders this weekend. I'm deeply troubled that these firings appear to be part of a broader campaign by President Trump and Secretary Hegseth to politicize the military. I salute General C.Q. Brown, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, General James Slife, and General Jennifer Short for their outstanding service. Each of them have had brilliant careers and have led with great courage, honor, and distinction. We all owe them a debt of gratitude for their service and sacrifice. However, the timing of these dismissals and the lack of any explanation for why risk politicizing the military and sending a chilling message to the ranks that political loyalty to President Trump supersedes loyalty to the Constitution. Mr. Feinberg, these actions will also cause issues for you if confirmed, because the Deputy Secretary of Defense works closely with the Vice Chiefs of the Joint Staff and the services, most of whom are now either relieved of duty or covering two jobs. This will make it difficult for you to get the focus and time needed from these officers to address the difficult problems facing the department. I'm most alarmed, however, by Secretary Hegseth's dismissal of the Judge Advocate Generals of the Armed Forces. These officers, known as TJAGs, are among the most senior uniformed lawyers in the military, strictly apolitical, and they have a fundamental role in ensuring that balanced lawful counsel is part of any military policy discussion. The TJAGs provide legal oversight that spans military justice, operational law, administrative compliance, and U.S. compliance with the law of armed conflict. We expect the TJAGs to always provide their best military advice, regardless of politics. These firings, along with the firings of the Inspector Generals, should alarm everyone about the President's commitment to the rule of law, especially for the military. Laws, rules, and regulations are of utmost importance in an institution with an enormous budget and a lethal mission. If adherence to the law becomes optional, the job of the Deputy Secretary becomes infinitely more difficult. Mr. Feinberg, if confirmed, you may be one of the most important advocates for our military service members and defense civilians within the Department of Defense. I hope you understand the responsibilities that come with your position and that you'll commit to speaking truth to power for the sake of our security. I hope you will also give us your assurances that you will communicate regularly and be transparent with this committee. A close bipartisan relationship has always been the hallmark of this committee in its dealing with the Department of Defense. Thank you for stepping forward to a lead at a critical time for our nation, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. We are now joined by our distinguished colleague and friend, Senator Haggerty of Tennessee, who will make introductory remarks for our nominee. Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Chairman Wicker, and Ranking Member Reed. I want to let you know how much I appreciate your holding this important nomination hearing today. It's a real privilege for me to introduce my good friend Steve Feinberg. Steve's President Trump's nominee to be our Deputy Secretary of Defense. During the first Trump administration, from 2018 to 2021, Steve chaired the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. There, he brought a fresh perspective and provided expert advice on a range of challenges that confronted U.S. national security. Before his nomination, Steve was co-CEO and Chief Investment Officer of Cerberus Capital Management, a global investment firm that he co-founded in 1992 and today manages some $68 billion of capital. At Cerberus, Steve spent 34 years investing in, fixing, and operating a variety of businesses, including those related to national defense and the U.S. intelligence community. Steve is a patriot with a great heart. One of the many things that sets Steve apart is his strategic vision and his willingness and desire to invest in ways that not only create and grow value for his investors, but also advance U.S. national security interests. Here, I want to quickly share a powerful story based on my own personal experience with Steve's leadership. When I served as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, I discovered that two Chinese firms were attempting to acquire the bankrupt Hanjin shipyard at Subic Bay in the Philippines. Subic Bay had previously served as U.S. naval base with a deepwater shipyard that is quite strategically located on the South China Sea. For various reasons, the International Development Finance Corporation and other parts of the U.S. government were not in a position to engage nor to help us solve this problem. So I engaged with top officials in the Trump administration and the governments of Japan and the Philippines, as well as with top actors in the private sector and in specific with Steve Feinberg and Cerberus. Working together, we assembled an ad hoc public-private solution to this problem and thwarted China's effort to acquire this very strategic port. Thanks to leadership from the Trump administration and Steve Feinberg and his team, we succeeded. Today, Hanjin Shipyard is known as Aguila Subic Shipyard, and it's owned by American investors. As a result, U.S. and allied firms have a joint presence there. For example, HD Hyundai, a South Korean firm, will build and maintain vessels at the shipyard, and Subcom, a U.S.-based undersea cable firm, is advancing projects in the region from that location. The U.S. military and the armed forces of the Philippines also have a significant presence there now. If Steve and his team had not stepped up to solve the problem, the Chinese Communist Party today would likely possess a vital piece of strategic infrastructure in the South China Sea, and the threats to the security of the United States and our partners would be enormous as a result. At Cerberus, Steve also worked hard on another issue that I dealt with firsthand as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, and that's helping the United States and our partners counter China's threat in 5G telecommunications by investing in commercial alternatives to Huawei and other Chinese telecom companies. Here again, Steve recognized a strategic challenge to the United States and sought to counter and minimize the influence and access that China could gain from control over spectrum and telecommunications infrastructure. On that note, I want to commend the committee for its strong support of the Defense Department's efforts to accelerate adoption of 5G and O-RAN technologies in order to provide strategic advantages to the warfighter, including by directing the Pentagon to establish a Secretary of Defense 5G cross-functional team to accomplish this objective. We couldn't have addressed these problems without Steve Feinberg, an outsider with a fresh perspective, who at the same time knows how to work on the inside while bringing innovation and ingenuity to the table. Steve, if confirmed, will do an outstanding job as the Pentagon's second highest ranking civilian official. Steve understands the mission. He'll leverage his leadership, his strategic thinking, his deep knowledge, his decades of experience, and his vast professional network, as well as his willingness to listen and learn and his decisiveness to improve the Defense Department. Just as he did at Cerberus for the past 34 years, Steve will work his heart out every day at the Department of Defense. He'll ensure that the building, its management, its operations, and its programs run better and more efficiently. And he'll focus on the department's goal of providing decisive strategic, operational, and tactical advantages to the warfighter. Steve Feinberg is the right man for this job. I look forward to his testimony today and to working with my colleagues to advance his nomination as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Haggerty. We would love to have you stay with us all morning, but perhaps you have other engagements, and so feel free to go, and you have our thanks. Mr. Feinberg, welcome, and you are now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Haggerty. Your words are too kind. Very much appreciated. I'd like to thank Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Senator Reed, and all the distinguished senators on the committee for this opportunity to speak in front of you today. It's a real honor. I'd like to thank the President of the United States, President Trump, for his nomination, giving me this great opportunity to serve our great nation. While the United States has all types of threats today, from North Korea to Russia to Iran, by far our biggest threat and most challenging is China. China is the first nation we've ever competed with that has both a great economy and a great military. China's entire private sector is fully committed in supporting that military development, and as such, they effectively have unlimited funding. China is incredibly determined. They feel a great sense of urgency, and they're fully dedicated to becoming the strongest nation in the world and having dominance over the United States. This is coming at a time where the United States has significant shortages in both our national security, many areas from weaknesses to shortages to problems. Chairman Wicker outlines so many of these in his opening remarks. We have shortages, obviously, in shipbuilding, nuclear modernization, aircraft development, cyber defense, hypersonics, counter space, defending our satellites, counter drones, defending against drone attacks, and so forth. There's so many more. Our workforce is challenged. Fabrication and batteries, two major areas of our industry we're relying on China for. So a lot of big challenges that we have to face. And it's all coming at a time when our budget is challenged, when all the services do not have enough money to meet all their current and future needs. However, there are some good news here. Is DOD, Pentagon, there is great opportunity to improve our cost structure, our efficiency, our operations, to really save a lot of money that could be plowed into mission. We do not have great financial accountability, financial metrics, poor systems, awful lot of low-hanging fruit there, so we can improve our cost structure. This is in my wheelhouse, hopefully. I spent a career helping organizations improve and And after doing it for so many years, I've certainly made my share of mistakes, but I certainly believe I understand, and I think I can add some value there. There's great people in the Pentagon, great people, and there's so much to work with. And at any time when you're trying to improve operations and efficiency and do better, there's going to be changes. Those changes can be initially difficult, but with the right leadership, the right focus, there's so many people at the Pentagon that want to do better and at our Department of Defense, and will work incredibly hard to do that. We will find the top people. We will give them autonomy, flexibility to do things, but of course, we will hold them accountable. As chairman of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board under President Trump in the first administration, it was clear that we had some of these deficiencies. 5 years later, I think things have only gotten worse. In our DOD companies, which we've bought over the years, certainly we were insiders, but I also have an outside perspective to bring, so I think that's a good combination. Not meaning to be too negative, but we really need to plug these shortages, focus on our priorities, get rid of legacy programs, be very disciplined, and while at the same time focusing on the economics. If we do that, giving America's great innovative capability and entrepreneurship, we will defeat China. If we don't, our very national security is at risk. With that, Mr. Chairman, I was wondering if I could introduce my family, if that's okay?
Please do, yes. We'd love to get to know them better.
Thank you. I'm fortunate to have behind me my nephew, Jovan Diaz. He's currently a major in Special Forces, Green Beret, served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. His brother, Eric Diaz, retired, former officer, served multiple tours in Iraq, Central America. My brother-in-law, Joe Swallow, former Marine. My godson here today, Moses Franco, former Marine and CO. And of course, my brother-in-law, Fred Sanchez, who was in the military, but sort of like it. He spent nearly 27 years in New York Police. My dad, who is too ill to be here today, is going to be 99. He served in the South Pacific. I believe he's watching. And all my uncles, may they rest in peace, all served in World War II. None of this would be possible without, my wife of almost 39 years, Gisela, and my 3 daughters, Madeline and Jillian.
I'm glad you finally got around to them.
I'm sorry?
Just a quip.
And my son-in-law also, who works at Cerberus today, buying companies that help America, which is a big part of our business. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you very, very much for that testimony. We now have some standard questions that are required of civilian nominees, and so I ask you simply to answer with yes or no. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes.
And I assume there will be no bad faith delay. Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes.
And there may be, indeed, undoubtedly will be some questions for the record. Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Thank you very much for those answers. And now, you really have answered something that we're all interested in. We're not where we need to be, and we are facing two nuclear near-peer adversaries, and our, for example, our shipbuilding, according to your testimony, is nowhere near where it should be. There are people who say we don't have the industrial capacity. What's the answer to that?
Well, Senator, it's a tough problem. Our supply chain is definitely weak. Our workforce needs to be improved. But a big piece of improving our supply chain is working more closely with our private sector. We have companies that can get it where our needs are, where our shortages are, and we need to work more closely with them. We need people inside of government that understand their issues, understand what drives their boards, what drives the pressure they get from shareholders, and that kind of knowledge will enable us to try to find and work with more private sector companies who'd be willing to get into this space. We certainly have the manufacturing capability and the capability in the U.S. to meet the shortages in our supply chain, and we just got to encourage those companies to do it.
Okay, and we probably will want you to enlarge on that on the record. Now, we're at 3% of GDP now. Is a percentage of GDP an accurate measure? I've been advocating for 5%. Why do people talk about a percentage of GDP?
Well, I think historically our military spending has been at a higher percentage of GDP, and of course, you know, more funds would help us in a very difficult period. But I think, in my humble opinion, my job as deputy, if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, would be work with whatever the funding the Senate and the House gives me, and I'll do my best with that.
Well, we had, I think we took a real good step Thursday night and early into the early hours Friday morning. You mentioned in terms of doing the sorts of things that I mentioned in my Forged Act and my paper about restoring freedoms forged. You mentioned there's some low-hanging fruit. There's discussion about the 8% request that went out from the new administration. I can tell you're going to be very thoughtful about this, but discuss, if you will, the extent of this low-hanging fruit, and to what extent do you think we can get started on that in this fiscal year?
Yes, Senator, thank you. You know, for example, in our program requirements, they're very rigid, gold-plated, expensive. We can get the job done with a simplification of many of those requirements. And then often, as a program starts, the requirements get changed, and then the industry has to then make changes, which really drives costs up. There's all types of things we can talk about regarding that. I will say on the cut, and obviously I haven't been involved in any of the conversations, but I do believe that part of the plan should be and will be that a lot of that money they're talking about saving will be reallocated inside DOD to mission priorities.
Of course, absolutely. Well, let me briefly ask you, this committee's been supportive of the Office of Strategic Capital and the idea of leveraging comparative advantages in private capital. Do you support the OSC, and do you believe we need to significantly grow the Office of Strategic Capital?
Yeah, I would agree. But I think they also need to move faster. Right now, it's a great concept. It can really help, but funding has to come quicker with a faster, less bureaucratic process. And it's very key for us to address that, or else that office will not be successful. But if we move at the speed of urgency, given our threats, that could be a great asset for us.
Thank you for that commitment to the speed of urgency. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Feinberg, for your testimony. You've already highlighted one of your major issues, that's building a budget and managing resources in which the threat environment is accelerating, and we still have current crises and commitments we must make. And with this 8% cut, that's very deep. It's not going to be, I think, go after the low-hanging fruit, and then you've got a lot more work to do, I perceive. Can you tell us how you're going to approach this problem?
Thank you, Senator. I think that when you look at DOTD today, we do not have good systems, good understanding of our cost structure. We don't have the right financial metrics. So much is possible if you put in those types of capabilities into the department. I think that in most cases that I've seen, in businesses that need to do better, we always are able to find more cuts than we would have expected without hurting mission. And of course, all these cuts can be reappropriated to the things we really need. So I don't think the idea is just to slash. The idea is to reallocate from things we don't need, which, for example, could be legacy systems that aren't valuable in the fight anymore, to things we do need.
But reallocation, does that get you an 8% reduction if you take X money and put X money in someplace else?
I'm sorry, Senator?
Reallocation, if you take X dollars from one account and put it in another account, how do you cut 8% of the DOD budget?
My understanding of what I thought those cuts were is that we would have an ability to put it into the mission in ways that we can't today. But if that's not available to the, if confirmed as Deputy Secretary, I think that there is so much there we can get at without cutting into the bone. And a lot of it is systems, capabilities, reporting, transparency. There's so much you can do when you do that.
Thank you. Over the weekend, the Secretary announced that 5,400 probationary employees would be dismissed, and it apparently was not done with any analysis. It was just preemptive. And you've run companies. Have you ever walked in and fired thousands of people without any analysis of the cost of benefits?
Well, I believe that we, every person is significant. And these cuts are always hard. And, but I believe that most of the cuts that we will see will be from people that want to retire, people who would like to resign early. You know, there's obviously over 900,000 civilians in the in DOD. So, while you can never, you know, not take one person seriously, in these kinds of reorganizations, there's always turnover. And without some turnover, you can't become an efficient organization.
On another topic, as I mentioned in my statement, Secretary Hested fired essentially all the TJAGs of the military services. And one of his rationales is, quote, removing blockade to what's going to happen. In usual terms, those blockades are called laws. So I believe Secretary Hestet has just shown, again, his contempt for the law. Do you commit to following the rule of law in your job?
Absolutely, Senator.
Federal law states clearly that no DOD employee may interfere with the provisions of independent advice by TJAGs to military service leadership and by JAG officers to commanders. Do you commit to respecting their independence
Yes,
and also instructing others to do so?
absolutely.
Relatedly, do you commit to the independence of DOD and other agencies, inspector generals?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Feinberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Cotton.
Mr. Feinberg, you've already mentioned in your opening remarks and your exchange with Senator Wicker the importance of revitalizing our defense industry. One important department has is the defense production going back decades, but unfortunately struggled to effectively use the Defense Production Act. The previous administration used it for non-critical needs like so-called green energy. What are your thoughts on how we could reform the Defense Production Act and use it more effectively to jumpstart our defense industry?
Yes, Senator, thank you. It's a great tool for us. I think we have to combine some of our top people at the Pentagon with private sector capability and look at the kind of things that we really need with urgency, speed, of course, a lot of due diligence, but not crushing due diligence, which takes us 6 months, a year and a half, which often happens in those kind of programs. Got to go faster, got to realize the threat, got to put the right people who can go faster.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I agree. Especially when you get to the subcomponent level in industry, there's a lot of challenges with supply, and the Defense Production Act was passed decades ago out of recognition that when we're in a crisis, as I think we face now around the world, the defense industry simply has to come first when it comes to certain critical components or supply chain challenges. You identified China as the most serious threat we face, certainly the most serious long-term threat we face. I completely agree with that. I'm curious about your thoughts on what are the key acquisition programs underway right now or that might soon be underway that you think we would need in a conflict in the Western Pacific? Obviously, a conflict most likely to happen if Communist China decided to go for the jugular in Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we need to develop autonomy in significant numbers with a centralized command, effectively brain. And we have to make the right decision on whether we need to build a next generation aircraft or we can rely on autonomy. Of course, we got to improve our shipbuilding. China's very strong there. Our nuclear capabilities are old. We have to upgrade them. And we have to develop hypersonics. We can't allow the Chinese to be faster than us, both in their weaponry and aircraft, and so many more, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. I agree on all of those. One question or issue that you mentioned in there is whether we have a manned sixth-generation fighter. I know that you haven't been on the job yet. You haven't gotten all the briefings that we've had on the committee. Do you have any preliminary thoughts on the need for a manned fighter?
Well, there's a controversial issue, Senator. I know there's views on both sides. I want to get in there, if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, look at all the classified information, and ultimately that decision could be made by the Secretary or the President even, and see if I can add some value to it.
Sure. As we discussed, I hope that we can move along promptly and you can get the same information the committee has. It's a decision that needs to be made soon, but it's not imminent in a matter of days. I mean, there are several weeks left, I believe, before the decision needs to be made. Sure. What about any thoughts on munitions? Obviously, munitions are complicated these days, but they're still not a stealth bomber. They're not an aircraft carrier. We do need to increase basic rates of production on these. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's just making more of the same stuff. Any thoughts on how we can accelerate production rates in private industry?
It's a tough problem. A lot of times in ammunition, you need ammunition machines effectively to help build it, and those are in short supply. You know, my hope is, if I am confirmed, that for each of these shortages, get in there, look at the specific facts, go over it in detail, understand the weaknesses, and come up with a detailed operating plan. And my humble opinion, often in the past, maybe some of the senior civilian leadership in the Pentagon, maybe not as deep into the detail of these. Every operating entity has all sorts of detail you got to get into. So I don't know yet, but I think there's a lot of companies we can attract to help us with this problem. It's not rocket science munitions, and there is an ability to expand.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks to your family, your very large extended family, and their record of service to our nation in the military and in law enforcement, and also thanks to your father, who's watching today, part of the greatest generation along with your uncles. It's a great American story that reflects the story of so many other of our military families.
Thank you for your service, Senator. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Shaheen.
Mr. Feinberg, congratulations on your nomination and welcome to all of your family. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you.
Chairman Wicker and you yourself, in your opening statement, made the point that we've been underinvesting in our defense in order to ensure the national security of this country. So I'm a little confused about the strategy that on the one hand, we have the administration talking about cutting 8% across the board primarily. There are about 17 areas of exempt from those cuts, but those don't include any manned aircraft, so no fighter jets, no tankers. It only excludes military construction for the Indo-Pacific area. And so on the one hand, we're talking about cutting 8% for 5 years, and on the other hand, we have upped the budget by $150 billion based on what the Senate voted to do on Thursday. So help me understand what the strategy is here and why on the one hand, I can understand, as you pointed out, and I think you're absolutely correct, that being strategic and thoughtful about how we become more efficient is really important. But across the board cuts don't do that. And so how is this making us more secure based on upping the budget on the one hand and cutting it on the other?
Yeah, obviously I don't have the detail on where these cuts are going to go. But, you know, there is always significant opportunities of things we don't need when you really get into the detail. In my humble opinion, if I'm able to get through confirmation, I think I can add value to that discussion and try to ensure that we make the right cuts. I do trust the Secretary's judgment on where he wants to go. But there is a real opportunity to make the right cuts. And it has to be done thoughtfully, to your point. But I don't think the exact nature of these cuts have yet been determined. So I think there's an opportunity to apply them correctly.
Perhaps the nature of the cuts haven't been determined, but the layoffs have already started. One of the places where layoffs have been proposed is with our public shipyards. We have the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard that New Hampshire and Maine share. It's the oldest continuously operating shipyard in the country. It has the best on-time record in terms of maintenance. It maintains our nuclear attack submarines. And I guess I would raise real concerns about whether it makes sense to cut our workforce when those attack submarines are one of the real advantages we have over China. Would you agree with me that we need to look long and hard before we start talking about cutting a workforce that maintains our nuclear attack submarines and gets them out on time and on budget?
Yes, Senator. I haven't seen the detail of this, but if I'm able to get in the job, I will look at it super carefully and try to ensure that we make the right cuts that won't cut into mission.
And one of the, Senator Reid talked about his concerns about the firing of some of the top generals at the Pentagon. And I share that concern. I appreciate that the president can put in whoever he wants, but to get rid of the years of experience and expertise so quickly seems to me to be short-sighted. But The question that I have for you is, if you're confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense, would you support military officers providing the committee their best military advice on issues, even if that advice differs from the Trump administration or President Trump's views?
Well, as deputy, I believe I'm an execution person, and I don't think it's my place to make decisions on what our top military officers communicate. But I would support an honest, transparent conversation at all times, and I am confident in President Trump's strategies, and I think that the military will work well with him and support the administration's goals.
Well, certainly an honest and transparent conversation is important to ensure we have the best military advice, which should be based on military capability and not based on politics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Feinberg, both to you and your family today. And thank you for putting yourself forward in these times to serve your country. Historically, nuclear deterrence has been the highest priority mission of the Department of Defense. Our triad protects the United States every single day from the only true existential threat that we face. And nuclear weapons guarantee our sovereignty. So, Mr. Feinberg, do you believe that nuclear deterrence should be the department's highest priority mission?
Yes, it's one of our very top priorities.
Is it the highest priority, sir?
It might be. I'd like to get, if I'm able to get in there and look at all the classified data on all our problems, I could certainly answer more directly, but there's nothing that could be more important than our nuclear modernization.
Today, for the first time in history, we face two peer competitors when it comes to our nuclear posture that we have. We have a current force posture that was designed in 2010 when the threat environment looked different, before Russia and China modernized, before they expanded their own arsenals. So I look forward to being able to have conversations with you in the future on the importance of making that, continuing to make that the department and our nation's highest priority. Mr.
Senator,
Feinberg,
I was thinking that one reason why I hesitated on it's the most important is clearly modernization is key. But we also need hypersonics, because if our enemy can carry nuclear capability on things faster than ours, it's a big problem. So I think it's a coordinated effort.
it's all part of the problem that we have when we have those peer adversaries.
Yes.
Threatening this country every single day. If confirmed, would you work with the Secretary to make sure that these modernization programs continue as best they can on schedule, and if opportunities present themselves to accelerate those programs, would you be supportive of that as well and work with the Secretary on that?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Feinberg, given your experience in the private sector, if confirmed, how would you foster greater innovation inside the department, and what can the department do to make itself more attractive to private sector companies in developing that innovation?
Well, right now, with the way our programs work, it's very rigid, gold-plated, endless rules, and the big defense contractors have an advantage just based on how contracts work, bids and proposals. The process is cumbersome, and often they win simply because they're better at it. So if we can simplify that process, make it fairer, not be as inflexible, that will promote competition, so competing companies can worry more about capabilities than the process. I also think that the cost of our very tough, rigid requirements sometimes is too gold-plated, which makes companies without as much capital unwilling to take the kind of risk. Some of that risk is unnecessary in development. So a lot we can do by getting into the program detail, line by line.
Good.
My view is the deputy has to go program by program, line by line, not hand it off to somebody else.
Okay, good. Mr. Feinberg, there's currently efforts underway to force the Department of Defense to vacate critical bands of spectrum, including the lower 3 band and the 7-8 gigahertz band. And this would mean that the department would not be allowed to operate radar systems or satellite systems that allow our warfighters to detect, to discriminate, track, and shoot incoming missiles and enemy targets. I adamantly believe that forcing national security systems to vacate these bands would be detrimental to national security. It would degrade our missile defense capabilities when we should be aggressively pursuing an Iron Dome for America. That would be off the table if these were vacated. However, I also understand that sharing these bands with commercial entities may be possible. This would potentially allow DoD systems to operate and coexist with commercial systems in the same exact bands without forcing us to lose these capabilities. Do you believe the Department of Defense must have meaningful co-leadership role in interagency determinations about the future of federal spectrum? Should DoD be at the table to be involved in those decisions?
Totally agree. We need spectrum to defend our country. We also need commercial use of it to develop the technologies that will defend our country. Best solution is sharing, but we have to get it right. Make sure sharing can be done without risk. That needs to get tested. And until that's clear that it can be done without risk, we must protect DoD's spectrum position.
Thank you. It must be clear that it can be done without risk,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, Senator, 100%.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feinberg, welcome to you and your family. I asked the following 2 initial questions of all nominees before any of my committees to address the fitness to serve. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
No.
Now, the DOD will need to cut some 8% off its budget, and again, we wonder how that happens when at the same time other parts of the budget is being increased. But a lot of those cuts, I think, will come from the workforce, which I think we acknowledge is a critical part of our readiness. So here we see that some 5,400 people have already been or will soon be let go from DOD. And these are people who are in probationary status. These are not people getting ready to retire. In fact, across the many departments, people on probation are being let go, 1,000 in DOJ, 250 in SBA. So these are cuts that are happening across the board, not based on any analysis of impact. And there are some 55,000 people on probation within the DOD, and I think the expectation is that many of them will be also let go. There are some 350 people in probationary status at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. And so these are critical people in our shipyards, as also mentioned by my colleague, Senator Shaheen. So since all of these cuts are being made without any kind of analysis, don't you have a concern about our ability to, that these cuts will have an impact on readiness?
Well, most of the substantial cuts that they're talking about are yet to happen.
Yes, as I mentioned, though, they're happening in those in the probationary status. These are people who just got hired, who are just being trained to serve.
Yeah, so, I've spent a career in restructuring companies and dealing with these workforce issues. If I can get through confirmation, I do think I can add some real value, working with the Secretary, of course, in the process to do that properly, fairly, with the right people. Every organization goes through some turnover when you have really needs to improve. Initially, it's difficult, but the top people will step up, and it can be ultimately
Feinberg,
improving the culture.
As I mentioned, these are not based on any kind of analysis that you would normally do in the civilian sector, which you are very familiar with. I hardly think that in your business you would just start getting rid of people across the board, especially new hires who presumably went through the process of vetting. Now, regarding the concerns about the purging of senior military officers, I too have the concern. Let me just ask you a series of questions that I expect either a yes or no answer. Do you believe it is important that senior military officers be able to provide their best military advice regardless of politics and without fear of reprisal?
Yes.
Do you believe that it is important that uniformed JAG officers feel free to provide their best legal advice on the fair administration of military justice and compliance with the law of armed conflict?
Yes.
Do you believe in the independence of the inspectors general to root out fraud, waste, and abuse?
Yes.
We are concerned about the summary cuts to USAID, and we're talking about thousands of people who were providing services to not just very important to our own country, but obviously to our allies. Mr. Feinberg, do you agree that gutting USAID funding and personnel endangers our interests around the globe, especially in the Indo-Pacific?
I don't know. I don't have all the facts and knowledge about USAID and what the considerations were in making those decisions, but I do trust the Secretary and the President's judgment on that.
Wouldn't you say that if you were a country or including island nations who receive USAID funds, this kind of cut would be shocking and would have negative impacts on their economy and their people?
Thank you very much, Senator
I'd say the answer has to be yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feinberg, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to visit beforehand in my office. I enjoyed that discussion. I want to also thank your family for their service to our country, and also thank you for taking the time to leave the private sector and to come in and to offer your expertise. The time that you spent at Cerberus Capital and the fact that you have looked at a number of different defense-related businesses in the past really does help with regard to how we make changes at the Pentagon level. I want to start just by clarifying one thing. When we talk about an 8% cut, we're talking about prioritizing which is the bottom 8% that they think or that they want leaders within the Pentagon to identify as perhaps being reapportionable to other more important portions. Is that your understanding as well, sir?
It is.
Thank you. Your background has also given you some insight, even before getting classified briefings, with regard to spectrum. And I want to spend some time on that once again. I think this is one of the most important issues that faces the Department of Defense right now, and that is spectrum sharing, which you're familiar with because actually one of the companies which you had invested in actually looked at spectrum sharing and the need for that. And that's the reason why I want to go through this a little bit. Senator Fisher did an excellent job of laying out the real serious threat to our national security should we lose the ability to use radar, which is located in the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz part of the spectrum. I don't want to get real deep technically, but basically that's the most advanced radars we have. You indicated hypersonics was an important part of the discussion right now. Those weapon systems, you're aware that we detect them using this portion of the spectrum. Are you familiar with that, sir?
Yes, Senator.
So if the Department of Defense was forced to either give it up or because of interference have a less likely chance of identifying that, it would make those systems less reliable. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yes, sir.
Right now in Hawaii, It is defended by destroyers that carry this portion of it that provides the radar defenses. The Secretary of the Navy, or the Navy, has indicated in multiple testimonies before this committee that there is a cost should they have to either make significant changes or lose that part of the spectrum or replace it elsewhere at $250 billion for the Navy alone to replace it over a period of perhaps 20 years. Are you familiar with that, sir?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Right now, we need to find a solution that allows for further development of spectrum by our commercial sectors, but at the same time, we can't lose or force the Department of Defense to give this portion up, or our nation is at risk. Would you agree with that, sir?
I do agree.
Today, if we look at the president's new idea, and I fully support him in this, the President Trump has issued what I believe is a game-changing executive order directing the Department of Defense to develop and build an Iron Dome missile defense shield for America. I think some people call it the Golden Dome. This dome for America would not be possible if the Department of Defense has to vacate some or all of the lower 3 band and other crucial portions of the spectrum. In fact, as Senator Fisher noted last week, Iron Dome for America will need even more radars than we currently have, and those systems cannot function properly if there is too much noise, which includes development of 5G by the commercial sectors, that noise on the spectrum where they are operating. If confirmed, will you protect the Department of Defense's spectrum so that President's Iron Dome for America can be built and function optimally?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Look, your background, you're a finance guy. You invested in a company that looks at spectrum sharing. Can you share a little bit of the expertise that you picked up with regard to spectrum sharing and the availability of it, if we are allowed the time to actually get it developed and prove it to be functional?
About 30 seconds worth of that, sir.
Okay, there's two ways. One is managed spectrum share, which we have to improve significantly to ensure it can be done safely and still protect our country. But I think we can do that over time. It has to be tested. The other is simultaneous share, and that is what DOD really would love. And that is early in its stage. It has to be tested, but does provide great promise and in terms of solving this problem. We got to really test it, make sure it works.
But it is a path forward, but it has to be tested.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Feinberg, for being here today. And I want to thank your family as well for their service. So let's start with our defense budget audibility.
Yeah.
Okay, we spoke about this in my office. I've been long committed to cutting unnecessary spending in Washington, D.C., and the Pentagon is no exception to this. The DOD, which controls the largest discretionary budget in the federal government, has never passed a full financial audit. This failure, it continues to erode our public trust, and it prevents the efficient use of taxpayer dollars for critical defense priorities. So, Mr. Feinberg, what specific measures will you implement to ensure the DOD finally passes an audit as our law requires?
Yes, it's super important. I mean, we got to have financial accountability. I guess I was told we have 480 systems at DOD. I'm not sure the exact number, but obviously we got to consolidate systems. We got to bring in the right help that can work closely with the Pentagon to have to be able to clarify and make simpler our financial process. You know, if confirmed, I can get in there and look at the specific details. We've done this historically in so many companies. Generally, when a company has a problem, they often have wild financial issues. So it can't say exactly, but it's all achievable. Financial audits are very achievable. We'll get it done.
Yes, and that's why I'm trusting that your background and expertise can make this possible. We know that there are many private organizations and businesses that are of a similar scale to the Pentagon, maybe not quite as large, but they successfully undergo rigorous financial audits all the time. This is possible. But I do believe you're hitting on the right thing when you talk about structural changes, the siloing of information within the department that needs to change for auditability. So are there also cultural changes that would be necessary at the Pentagon to make sure that there is financial accountability?
For sure, it has to be a priority. We have to recognize the importance of it. And because not only it's about, as you said, getting an audit done, it's about being able to understand our finances, understand our cost structure. I don't believe in the Department of Defense any of our leaders fully understands our cost structure, and at one hit of a button could say, like most of our CEOs, could say, this is what this costs, this is what that, this is where I'm spending money. Mm-hmm. That specificity is simple, but it's key. So has to be a priority. Not that easy to do quickly, to change, all the different systems in a way that doesn't make things worse. So it has to be done carefully. We need a great controller at DOD, one that has great private sector experience. But we also need a great deputy for him that understands the FAR and all the issues relates to government.
Yeah, thank you. Another issue very quickly is making sure that we are streamlining the acquisition process. Procurement is a mess at the DOD, and anyone familiar with the Pentagon understands that the current acquisition process is very sluggish. It is burdened by a lot of bureaucracy, and obviously to everyone, it's prone to cost overruns. So, Mr. Feinberg, what steps will you take to accelerate the transition of AI and other emerging technologies from research and development to actual operational deployment?
AI is an overused word in the sense most of it is just high-end data analytics. Of course, there is some use of AI, but it's developing. The key, I think, to success is having the operators partner with the technologists, and they really have to work together. Often the technologists are, we know it all, and other times the operators are, hey, don't bother me with this, I'm busy. So both sides have to accept that partnership. Technologists have to accept the operator's knowledge is essential in developing better data analytics and AI, and the technologists have to work closely, and the operators have to understand the value and the benefit. Parts culture, every company that's successful at that integration has that partnership.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Feinberg.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Ernst. Senator Kane has slipped in under the wire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations to the nominee. I'm still huffing and puffing from racing from another meeting, but I really appreciated the meeting that we had in my office. I think you have a sort of a non-traditional skill set to bring to this nomination, but for reasons I may get into in my questions and that we discussed in the office, I think some non-traditional skills are sort of necessary right now in some of the matters you discussed in your opening statement. Before I ask you a question, I just want to tell my colleagues, I had a whirlwind weekend. We were on the floor till 5 a.m. Friday on the reconciliation bill, and then I flew to Finland. And I just spent the weekend with the Virginia Army Guard and the Karelia Brigade, which is one of the 3 brigades of the Finnish Army, doing a joint training exercise in snow-covered birch forests in southern Finland. And it was a fascinating 48 hours on the ground with a great NATO ally. I met with the president, the foreign minister, the permanent defense secretary, the shipbuilding industry. And Finland's a great ally and a great friend, and it's important to hear what your friends say. I came back with some thoughts. We got to remember 1938. A desire on behalf of the Prime Minister of England to declare peace in our time. He was able to achieve it and declare peace in our time, but it was a disaster because the peace of appeasing a bully was a catastrophe. In 1975 in Helsinki, 50 years ago this summer, we entered into the Helsinki Accords to create stability in Europe, and the then Soviet Union pledged to respect the sovereign integrity of every other nation. In fact, all the signatories to the Accords did. That's worthy of celebration after 50 years and revitalizing. And in 1995, we created the OSCE, coming out of the Helsinki Accords to essentially do the same thing. 5 years ago this week, President Trump negotiated a deal with the Taliban, leaving the government of Afghanistan out of the deal. And we were able to declare peace in our time, but the decision to omit Afghan participation in that peace deal turned into a catastrophe. And the Inspector General that did the after assessment after August of 2021 indicated that cutting the Afghans out led to such a feeling of abandonment that that was one of the critical factors in that going wrong. Even if you forget all the history, just remember what your parents told you when you were going to school the first time you complained about a bully. They said you got to stand up to a bully or a bully will keep bullying you and others. And so yesterday in the meetings in Helsinki, it was the 3rd anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And a resolution was offered at the UN General Assembly containing this phrase: the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation has persisted for 3 years. That phrase, saying that it was an invasion by the Russian Federation, led the United States of America to vote no. The resolution failed. The U.S. voted no along with Russia, Nicaragua, North Korea. It was sobering to be in Helsinki with this new NATO ally who joined NATO and is exercising with Virginia troops and have the U.S. unwilling to vote for something because it said, place the blame for the invasion on the Russian Federation. We have a president who won't clearly say it. We have a Secretary of Defense who won't clearly say it. We have too many people who won't speak the truth. This was a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And at the highest levels of our government right now, we have folks who won't speak the truth, and they'll stand with Russia and Nicaragua and North Korea rather than standing with allies. It is important that we not let these things just pass by unremarked upon. This is the first armed services hearing we've had since the 3rd anniversary, and I just felt like I wanted to put it on the record. Would you agree with me? Mr. Feinberg, you talked about the competition with China and what it's going to take for us to succeed. Would you agree with me that in that competition, a robust network of allies is one of the great assets that the United States has, and we should work to maintain it?
Yes, I think our allies are very important, but our relationships with them need to be fair to America and in our interest.
I would never suggest otherwise.
Of course, Senator. And also, as deputy, execution would be my job, and making diplomatic policy and relationship decisions would be more of the job of the Secretary and, of course, the President.
I really will want your help, and we talked at length about shipbuilding. We are putting more money in year after year, and then let's put more money in is not getting us the result that we need. And I think you have a skill set, again, that's a little bit non-traditional, but we're not going to be able to solve our production woes just by this committee voting for greater appropriations. If we don't have some change makers, we're not going to get to where we need to get, and I look forward to continuing that discussion. With that, Mr. President, I yield. I'd like to ask that the UN General Assembly resolution that I referred to, that the U.S. voted against and caused it to fail, I'd like to ask that it be entered into the record.
Reserving the right to object, I was told the resolution was adopted by the General Assembly.
There was a resolution adopted. The one that I read that put the onus on Russia was defeated. One that removed it, the Security Council did approve it, although the U.S. abstained.
Let's, if it's all right, let's put both of them in the record for clarity.
No worries.
Thank you very much. Take a deep breath. Perhaps Senator Scott would like to pass. Senator Mullen.
Now, that's a gentleman there. Thank you, sir.
Who are you speaking of? I'm just kidding.
Both.
Yeah.
I want to take some time here because it wasn't where I was planning to go, but I just can't allow my colleagues on the other side to just spew 100% mistruths constantly and then play into the fear of the American people. And I'm just going to start, first of all, with our national security issues. National security issue one is our national debt. And our national debt is now costing us more to just pay interest than we spend on our military. That's a huge national security risk. And so at what point do we start making cuts? And people want to start talking about cutting 5,400 jobs out of the DOD as a whole when they have 950,000 employees, and we're talking about less than 0.5% of the workforce. Where do we start cutting? We're spending trillions of dollars with agencies that are not unfunded, and you're going to tell me we don't have the ability to cut some employees when underneath the Biden administration it was bloated and there's not room to cut? When a company is going underwater, you do have to take a look at the workforce. I don't want to suggest that our country is going underwater, but if we continue this path, we will. And I commend President Trump and those that he has put in place to actually make hard cuts. Making cuts are difficult. It's tough. But when are we supposed to start if we don't start now? The previous administration wasn't willing to do that. And then, as the senator that just asked questions wanted to bring up the Afghanistan withdrawal, brother, that's very, very close to me. That hits home. And you're going to lay the withdrawal on President Trump and say it was his fault? The disastrous withdrawal came 100% from the Biden administration. And American lives were left behind and are still dying because of it. And Americans' lives were lost during the withdrawal. And you're going to sit there with a straight face and try to say that it was President Trump's fault? When the Biden administration, and all of us know this because we were briefed on this, that the Biden administration threw out the entire withdrawal plan that the Trump administration had and decided to go their own way. And man, wasn't that great. And then we're going to start talking about President Trump not calling a bully out like Putin. Do we forget what happened in 2017 when Trump 100% told Russia to stay out of Syria, not to be involved, especially with the bombing of Assad's own people? And when they did, President Trump within 30 minutes took out the airfield that they operated out of, destroyed it, and then took back the airspace. And we had the airspace in Syria all the way up until Biden took office and we gave it back to Putin. Or stand up to a bully. Do we want to go back to Israel and Hamas and discuss the way the Biden administration handled that? And the way they refused to call Hamas a terrorist organization and the Houthis a terrorist organization and Iran a terrorist organization? And you're going to sit there with a straight face and actually say that about President Trump? Are you joking me? Are we serious saying that President Trump isn't willing to stand up to a bully when underneath his administration was the only time that Russia didn't advance into Ukraine? Because he did underneath Obama when they took Crimea, and they did underneath Biden because they didn't respect him because of the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and every expert will tell you that. So where is it that we're coming up with this other than just plain fear? All I want to do is just stroke fear into the American people and try to divide something between us and the president. Because the president is bringing back hostages. He also brought back a hostage that Biden left behind, and he didn't give up one thing to Russia, including a guy that was highly, highly considered a threat to the world. What was his name? Anybody? What was his nickname? Soleimani. No, not Soleimani. Dr. Death that we decided to trade for. And I'm sure you guys thought that was a good trade. Guys, give me a break. We're trying to advance America's agenda and do what's best for this country, and the American people agree with the direction we're going. So, sir, sorry about going on a rant here, because I actually did want to get into your business and the direction that you can take our defense industry, but that couldn't go without answered. And so you and I have already had a conversation. We'll continue the conversation. I look forward to working with you. With that,
Thank you.
I yield back
Thank
to
you,
sir.
Senator Mullen. Senator Warren.
So, Mr. Feinberg, you've been nominated to be Secretary of Defense in charge of DOD's $850 billion budget. Your main qualification is that you have built one of the world's largest private equity companies. You've spent your entire career honing the private equity tools that used to hollow out our businesses, from department stores to veterinary practices. And presumably those are the skills that you would bring to the Department of Defense. So I just want to look at how that's worked. Let's start with how you treat people. In Massachusetts in 2010, your private equity firm bought 6 nonprofit hospitals, turned them into for-profit hospitals called Steward. 10 years later, you cashed out, having made a profit, a little shy of $1 billion, and leaving behind a hospital system that was staggered under a load of debt, and 4 years later, collapsed into bankruptcy. Now, Mr. Feinberg, when we met in my office, you told me that your private equity outfit made an average 23% annual return each year that you owned your hospitals. If Steward Nurses had gotten the same 23% salary increases that your investors effectively got every year, do you know how much they would be paid at the time you sold off your hospitals?
Well, I do know that in 2010, the hospitals were going under, and we were asked...
I'm sorry, Mr. Feinberg, we're going to have very limited time here, and I actually want to spend it on your qualifications to do this job. And it's about how you treat people. The average nurse in the Steward hospitals at the time you bought them made $85,120. At a 23% annual raise, how much money would they be making right now?
I'm not going to do the math. But
Okay, I'll do the math for you.
What I could tell you...
$829,828. Now, of course, the nurses didn't do that well. During that same period of time, Kearney Hospital, one of the hospitals you bought in Massachusetts, raised nurses' salaries about 1.5% a year, and that was the best increase across the Steward hospitals that you were running. In other words, you seem to think that when it is time to reorganize a business, that equity should get about 15 times as much return on their investment as the people who actually do the work. So let's take a look at the second issue, and that is maintaining critical functions.
Senator, would you like me to respond to Stewart?
At the Department of Defense,
inaccurate
but
statements.
we also
Mr.
need to
Feinberg,
maintain
she's
our
entitled
national
to make a
security.
speech.
I apologize.
She's
So let
entitled to
us
go
go
on and
back
on.
to Steward hospitals. Yes. Did you cut fat or did you cut vital functions? Now, Mr. Feinberg, the town of Quincy used to have a full medical center with primary and specialty care, a surgery department, an urgent care department, and a VA clinic. That was its basic function. After your private equity company finished with it, what was left?
Well, when we exited the investment in 2020, the company was doing well.
I'm asking what was left of the Quincy Hospital.
Now,
when you took
Senator,
it over.
he's trying to answer a
Well, that's
question.
what I'm
You finally
asking.
stopped for a breath. Do you intend to let him at least have maybe 20, 30 seconds to
Can I
answer
have my
a
time
question?
back?
Yes, I said you're entitled to make a speech, but you stopped for, you stopped with a question mark, and he started to try to answer the question.
All right. What's the answer to the question? What was left of the Quincy Hospital? That was my question.
A lot's happened after we exited, and there has been mismanagement. We did say...
By clarifying question, what was left when you exited?
I'm not certain about that
It was an emergency room and nothing more.
But we took those hospitals from collapse in 2010. We're going to shut it down as the 10th largest employer in Massachusetts. Turned them around, fixed them, grew them, had a tremendous amount of success, worked closely with the governor, and the problems in Stewart happened after we exited the investment.
I am asking about questions as you exited and during the period of time you ran it. Now, of course, a hospital is supposed to provide good quality care, and that takes qualified nurses and other staffers. Mr. Feinberg, for the hospitals that didn't close down during the time you ran it, do you know how many unsafe staffing complaints were filed?
I do know the vast majority of problems happened after we left. And by the way, our nurses were among the highest paid in the country.
Is that a no, that you don't know how much?
I don't know.
How many unsafe staffing complaints were filed? Well, let me tell you, there were over 1,000 filed. That is 5 times the normal rate in Massachusetts.
What year was that?
Look, these are the years that you were in control. For the 2 hospitals.
Senator Warren, perhaps you would like to take another round. But
No, I'd like to just finish.
No,
I
your
just have
time
a
has
close.
expired, Senator. Your time has expired.
I spent a great deal of that time listening to the chairman tell me how I
Senator's
have to
time has
conduct my
expired.
questions.
Senator's time has
You know,
expired.
could I just
Senator
close?
Sullivan.
Could I just close,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd just like to say why I
Thank you,
care
Mr.
about
Chairman.
this issue.
I have a,
Time has expired. She can have another round.
Mr. Feinberg, thank you for your service and appreciated our meetings over the last several months. Let me just begin. The ranking member mentioned the apolitical military. Secretary Hegseth, in his confirmation hearing, said that the professional uniformed military, quote, must remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. That's the Secretary's statement. I agree with that. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
And this is a unique and important attribute of our U.S. military that makes our country very strong and our military very strong. Do you agree with that as well?
Yes.
Let me ask another question that I raised in Secretary Hegseth's hearing. He got the question I asked him right about when Billy Mitchell, the father of the U.S. Air Force, testified in front of this committee in the mid-1930s, calling Alaska the most strategic place in the world. Do you agree with that?
I agree it's one of the most strategic
Okay,
places
all
in the
right.
world.
Well, maybe I won't support you. No, I'm kidding. It's not Greenland, though. Let's make that. In all seriousness, we have a lot going on in Alaska. We've had Russian, Chinese, ADIZ incursions, naval incursions. It's a real active place. Lower 48 media doesn't cover it. We had 2 incursions just last week by Russian Bear bombers. Would you commit to come to Alaska with me, if confirmed, to see our great military up there and just how strategic it is?
I will.
Let me ask on shipbuilding. We are in a crisis. The Biden administration focused more on climate change than shipbuilding. The Congressional Research Service, which is our research service here in the Congress, their experts said we're in the worst crisis in shipbuilding in over 40 years. The Chinese are building a giant Navy. It's already bigger than ours by 2030. I think it's going to be over 420 ships. It'll be about 120 to 130 times bigger in terms of ships, 120, 130 ships bigger than our Navy. We could spend 2 hearings on shipbuilding, but can you give me a sense? You've done this kind of thing where you've turned around a real big problem in the private sector. This is a huge private sector and government challenge. Give me a couple big ideas. My team and I put together a big shipbuilding plan, so is the chairman. This is a bipartisan issue, by the way. Senator Kelly is very focused on this. Our National Security Advisor now, Mike Waltz, was very focused on this. There's a lot of good ideas there, but give me a couple key elements of how we turn this around. And let me I mentioned this to President Trump. Republicans actually have a history of this, right? Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet, President Reagan's 600-ship Navy. This should be a priority, and I think it is, of the President, the Secretary of Navy, but we're going to need your experience to do this. What are some big ideas you have on this?
You know, talent is everything, people. HR is hard, and trying to get the right people, even the best leaders will have failures. But I think we need to work very closely with, the PPO and administration, and find really strong manufacturing private leaders who understand process, workforce, who've done this before, and really drive talent into the struggling shipyards that can partner with a lot of our great people in the Pentagon and DOD to help improve. This is an operational turnaround. It's about people, it's about talent. There's plenty of leaders in America that have done this. We just got to get them on the home team there. And
Well,
all
I
in.
think this committee wants to work with you on this. It's a really important issue. It's a bipartisan issue. It's a critical issue. Let me ask one final question, Ms. Feinberg. The president has declared a national energy emergency. Unfortunately, the last administration didn't recognize the strategic assets of our country, especially my state. Biden administration issued 70 executive orders to shut down Alaska. President Trump on day one issued this executive order on unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. I talked to Secretary Hegseth about this over the weekend. Can you commit to me, the Secretary of Defense is mentioned in the CEO and many others, to work with me in this committee on unleashing our critical mineral potential, natural gas potential, military bases buying natural gas in Alaska? This is a key component of the president's strategy. It's going to make our country stronger, and it's a far cry from what we just experienced under the Biden administration.
Will you
When
make
to
that-
shut down critical
Will you
minerals.
make that commitment, Mr. Feinberg?
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Senator.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your willingness to serve, Mr. Feinberg, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
As you know, 5,000 probationary employees have been fired. The plan apparently is to cut another 75,000 Department of Defense civilian employees. You would agree with me that civilian employees often perform a very critical role for the Department of Defense.
Yes, I do.
And many of these layoffs, in fact, will undercut our national security. I've just come from a hearing of the Veterans Affairs Committee, a joint House-Senate hearing. I'm the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Many of them are deeply concerned about their jobs in the VA and the Department of Defense. The position you've been nominated to fill oversees the entirety of the workforce and the civilian workforce at the DOD. My question is really simple. What do you have to say to the veterans at the Department of Defense whom Elon Musk is firing?
Well, we certainly have a cost problem, and addressing cost problems are difficult. Sometimes we have to make change to help an organization do better in the future. It has to be done thoughtfully. So I would say to those veterans, we got to make our Department of Defense stronger. We got to do hopefully we can do, the majority of cuts are coming. If I'm able to get confirmed,
But what
I'll have
I
an
hear
influence on
you
that.
saying, sir, is essentially, we don't need you. You're expendable. Your life of service is meaningless, and the job you're doing now is going to be roadkill.
Listen,
That's the message that is being sent to these veterans. And so I would simply urge you to take into account that these Department of Defense civilian employees were once wearing a uniform.
Totally understand, and it's something that has to be done the right way. But all these people are super important. But if you can't, every organization has turnover, has to make change. And if you don't make change, you can end up in a much worse position. So we can't endlessly expand the force. We have to sometimes make change. But to your point,
and you know from your, and I apologize for
yeah.
interrupting, but as you know, our
I'm
time
sorry.
is limited.
Yes.
You know from all of your experience in the private sector that you just can't take a meat axe. You have to use a scalpel in determining who is necessary and not. And eliminating waste doesn't mean you lay waste to the Department of Defense. Let me move on to another topic, if I may. The United States military is the best trained and most effective fighting force the world has ever seen. We depend on our armed forces to protect us from hostile foreign powers. But unlike in countries where autocratic leaders deploy their military against their own people, the United States military is not a weapon to be used against Americans. Domestic deployment of federal armed forces is legally authorized under very narrow circumstances and only in the most extreme emergency scenarios. Would you agree with me that any use of the American military against American people should be an absolute last resort?
Yes.
I welcome that statement because the administration has implied, in fact, explicitly said that it may use the American military for mass deportations, suppressing protests, responding to crime in cities and urban areas. I hope those statements prove to be untrue and exaggeration, but I welcome your statement.
Well, I do have faith that President Trump will follow the law and do that appropriately.
Well, more than faith will be required. I think you will need to stand up and speak out and, if necessary, resign if you are asked to do something that you feel is illegal or immoral.
I don't believe President Trump will ever ask me to.
That's what we have heard again and again and again. And history, I think, is a fair warning to us about what we can expect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Scott, you've been most patient.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Ms. Feinberg, you're going to do a great job. You've got a great background. You believe in transparency. You believe in accountability. You're going to bring a breath of fresh air because you know in the private sector, you've got to get results by holding people accountable, but giving them specific tasks to get done, and you're going to do a great job. In the last 6 years, we passed a significant amount of legislation through the National Defense Authorization Act to hold China accountable, whether it's we don't buy Chinese drones in our military and our government, federal government. We don't buy LiDAR technology. We stop buying Chinese garlic that's made in sewer water in our commissaries. We hopefully are starting the process of not buying Chinese drugs for our military. How important it is to our fighting men and women that we don't rely on Communist China, who has decided to be our adversary, for anything in time of war.
I'm sorry, Senator.
How important is it to completely decouple from China from the standpoint of what our military is doing?
It's very important and very difficult, and but we got to do it with urgency.
So do you think we ought to be buying Chinese computers for our military?
No.
Do you think we ought to be buying Chinese medicines for our military?
No.
We ought to be, what about Chinese chips? How about Chinese telephones?
No.
Can you name anything that's made in China that we ought to just go full force and be buying for our military?
Well, there are some completely commoditized basic products that wouldn't put our national security in jeopardy, but it's certainly a difficult problem.
Yeah. So the audits, you've invested a lot of companies. Did you ever do an audit?
Did I ever do an audit personally?
Yeah. No, but did you ever have all your companies audited?
All of them are.
Yep. And if the auditor gave you some points that you had to get fixed by the next audit, did you do it?
We better fix it by that audit.
Yep. And if not, what would you do?
If you don't have an audit, it's a big problem.
Yeah. So would you keep the CFO?
No.
No. So our military doesn't have an audit. I think the Marines are the only ones that have completed an audit. So what do you think ought to happen to change the attitude with regard to audits of our Department of Defense?
Well, we got to make it a priority, but in making audit a priority, it will also help us on all types of understanding financial metrics, our cost structure, our capabilities. You know, one thing that I've observed is that while we've had some great, obviously, civilian leadership in the Pentagon. In my humble opinion, at times, some of the people in the operational execution jobs are not involved in detail. And we're going to set up a war room, if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, and we're going to go over every program, every cost, line by line, with an army of people until it's done 24/7. And we're going to understand where our costs are, why we don't have our audit, where the financial problems are, and then we'll come up with a plan to fix it. But it has to be done line by line a deal. It's a big task. It's a big war room. But I think the Pentagon will support it, and I think the people will be excited to see it as well.
So in your private sector, as you made investments, did you a lot of times did you have to make tough decisions other people wouldn't make? It was as simple as that. They just wouldn't make the decision to look how things were being spent, or programs that didn't work, or things like that.
We had to make tough decisions all the time, and not everyone is right. But if you're afraid to act, the problem was worse.
Right. So are you optimistic that you'll be able to have a positive impact on getting the military in a position that we're most lethal fighting force out there?
The Secretary has made that a big priority, and I think we can absolutely make great strides toward it.
So let's assume you serve for 4 years. What would you like to say you accomplished at the end of those 4 years?
Basically, that I've helped the Secretary and the President improve DOD, preferably in total anonymity, and I'll fade off into the sunset with some better performance that hopefully I had some small role in.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Total anonymity is something all of us seek, but none of us achieve.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I understand your impulse. I apologize for not being here. I was at a Veterans Affairs Committee on the House side, and I know there's been a great deal of discussion about the potential cuts in the workforce. What I'm interested in, there's the discussion of 8%, that's 70,000 people. What I'm interested in of you as a manager, how do you intend to go about that? Because the cuts that have been occurring throughout the federal government so far haven't been very thoughtful. All probationary people, for example, that's not a terribly rational way to make these decisions. There may be great people who are probationary. So what would the process be whereby you reduce the Department of Defense workforce by 70,000 people?
Yeah, most of the cuts that are potentially that might happen going forward have not yet been made, and hopefully, if I'm fortunate enough to get through, I think that I can be helpful in the analysis, study, the considerations.
You're the chief operating officer. You shouldn't be helpful. You're in charge of this process.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to know the process you intend to follow.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what role the Secretary would want me to play, but assuming I am in charge of that, we would look at the exact detail of people, who's doing what jobs contribute what do we need, what don't we need, study it carefully, and really come up with a concrete, specific, granular plan before we would have final.
Firing all probationary employees would not be would not be how you would go about it. Is that correct?
Well, I wasn't involved with that. I don't know the detail, so not fair for me to say.
No, but you can comment on the rationality of firing all probationary employees, some of whom maybe have been in the department for 10 years and just got promoted and are therefore probationary. Others may be the best person the department's ever hired, but they've only been there for a year. Do you think it's a rational process to simply arbitrarily fire all probationary employees?
You know, I don't know how it was done. I don't know the considerations.
No, I'm asking you not how it was done, but I'm asking you if that approach is a rational way to reduce a workforce. Fire everybody that's been hired in the last couple of years. Is that a good management practice? Is that what you would have done at Cerberus?
Well, I will say that we have over 900,000 civilian employees.
Right.
So while every person counts, and it's of course very important, it's there's going to be some change that we're in numbers that are more
That's
significant.
not my question. There's been a stated goal of reducing the workforce by 8%. That's 70,000 people.
Yeah.
You're the chief operating officer. Presumably, you'll be in charge of the process of reducing the workforce by 70,000 people. I want to know how you're going to do it. And one of my questions is, are you going to use the arbitrary yardstick of probationary employees? Yes or no?
I don't know the considerations or the detail of what was thought before that cut. What I can tell you is, if I'm in there, we will carefully look at the cuts, balance and weigh what we need and what we don't, be careful not to cut into mission, and do it in a granular, bottoms-up, person-by-person, detailed way.
So does that answer mean you're not going to cut all probationary employees arbitrarily? Is that a no to that answer to that question? It sounded like it. This is a pretty straightforward question. Are you going to fire all probationary employees first to get to the 70,000? Yes or no?
Have to look at the detail, don't know yet. I don't think, and I don't know the considerations that were thought through before those cuts were made.
Okay. You're a smart guy. You know what I'm asking. I don't understand why you can't tell me yes or no whether this is going to be one of the tools you use to reduce the workforce. Let me change the subject. There's a lot of discussion around here about reinvigorating the defense industrial base. Any thoughts on how we actually do that? I've heard that phrase 1,000 times. I've never heard anybody say exactly how we go about it.
I think we need to bring in new companies. We have great manufacturing capability in the United States. For example, if we were to call up General Motors or Ford and say, we need you in our defense base, find ways under OTA or sole source where we can give new companies, especially the ones that scale and can operate. So much is talked about venture. Far more important, in my opinion, is scale and operations, or larger businesses. They are at a disadvantage competing with the big defense companies. They're not in the bids and proposals and contracting area. So there's a lot of restrictions, a lot of tough things to get in there. We got to make it easier for them. Maybe not the most competitive answer on the surface, but will lead to much more competitive in the future. I would go to our big manufacturing companies, give them a shot on new programs if we think their capabilities can meet it, and let them figure out a way under FAR to give them a shot without a wide-scale competition with all our big defense companies, which, by the way, are too consolidated.
Thank you,
Thank
Senator.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. And as a matter of fact, Senator King and Mr. Feinberg, it is a fact that General Mills actually used to be in the defense manufacturing business. So good point there. Senator Schmidt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Mr. Feinberg. I actually think of all the confirmation hearings that we're going to do, and some of which get a lot more publicity than this one. I don't know if this is on C-SPAN. I don't know if it's being covered by anything else. Based on your testimony earlier about being in obscurity, I'm sure you're hoping it's not on any channel, I guess. But I think this is actually one of the most important jobs in the entirety of the federal government. Because I sit here and in bipartisan unison, we talk a lot about how we absolutely have to have procurement reform, and I think it's a huge waste for some of my Democrat colleagues to be railing away on this temper tantrum about DOGE when they could be asking the questions that we've been told for forever that are actually top of mind, which is sort of with 14 seconds left, my friend from Maine asked about how you actually get this kind of procurement reform. And so I'd like to drill down just a little bit on that. You've talked about introducing more competition. That's certainly, I think, part of it. One thing specifically that I've heard from a lot of Missouri-based suppliers are these TINA requirements. Having this certified cost or pricing data for these relatively small or medium-sized businesses really is a barrier to entry for the work. Will you support sort of trying to figure out how we can do better there so you actually have the requirements aren't so burdensome that you can actually have new entrants into the system, or they can actually more competitively bid?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that piece, but I understand the concept, and I'll make sure I look at it. And act on it appropriately.
Okay, and then I think that part of the reason why your job is so important is that so much of this is going to be a cultural shift that's difficult in a organization the size of the Department of Defense. But this kind of mindset of spending what's allocated, how do you get to a place where we're actually maximize the benefit of every dollar?
Well, first, if we can prioritize it on the most important missions, get rid, which is hard and takes time, of legacy spending, and really do it with discipline on what we really need, and then focus on how to be efficient and cut costs in our program management and on our operations.
I know that there's been a lot of advancements. I'm sure you've seen this in the private sector. And by the way, I want to thank you. You've gotten a lot of criticism for being successful in the private sector, and I want to thank you for your divesting a lot to come take this position and share your expertise on behalf of the American people to make our defense structure and the Pentagon and our weapon systems the best they can be to protect Americans. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of changes and a lot of innovation as relates to AI and automation and real-time data analytics that haven't found their way to the Pentagon. How do you go about improving that culture within DOD? What have you done before that you think you can bring to the Pentagon?
You know, I remember, at our supermarket company, Albertsons, I should say what used to be the company, we went to the CEO and we said, boy, we got Amazon in the grocery business, we got all these guys using technology, and I remember the CEO said to me, I don't need any of that stuff. I've been doing this, really good CEO, I've been doing this my whole life, leave me alone. Unfortunately, change is so important and you got to be ahead of it. So it is a challenge going into departments that have done things a long time a certain way and trying to make change and being forceful about it. There certainly needs to be a partnership, I said earlier, with technology people to understand the importance of the operational people on the ground. And you'll find the best people, depending on who want this change, will embrace it. And those who are going to let run with it, give them autonomy and let them drive it.
Well, one of the things I think that's been talked a lot about, which I agree with, is moving towards high-tech weapons systems that can be mass-produced, like drones that are able to swarm. But I do think that we've got to be able to do both, which is one of the reasons why the next generation air defense program is really, really important. I think that those advancements are good, and they may be the future, but we've talked about this a little bit in my office. The two places where we have absolute advantage over the CCP is our nuclear subs and our bomber and fighter fleets. The air superiority we have and the underwater superiority that we have. And I know that you committed in my office that we would work together on that to make sure that in addition to introducing some of the new high-tech systems that are available, that we're not going to abandon the superiority we have in the skies.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feinberg, thank you for your willingness to serve in this very important role. I want to follow up to some of the comments the senator from Oklahoma, Senator Mullen, made earlier in response to Senator Kaine calling out Putin as a bully and this administration's unwillingness to state the obvious. Senator Mullen said that Senator Kaine was spewing 100% mistruths constantly, essentially calling him a liar. He was referring specifically to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. And in response, Senator Mullen mentioned Assad, Israel, Hamas, Houthis, Iran, hostages, and Dr. Death. I'm pretty sure he did not mention Putin by name. I think the appropriate response would be to say that Putin was, in fact, a bully, but he didn't say that. I think it's instructive that he would not even mention Vladimir Putin by name. Putin's a bully. And I'm not hearing that from this administration. I do hear it from some people on the other side of the aisle, and I appreciate that. More people need to get off the sidelines on this issue. And I think it's clear to many of us that Donald Trump blew up the Western alliance this past week. 80 years of an alliance. Gone. It's disturbing. Mr. Feinberg, earlier you said execution would be your job, and it's part of the job. But I don't think it's all of the job. You're going to often find yourself in the room. And when things like, as an example, the SecDef a few days ago said, when asked whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine, he said it's complicated. It's not complicated. Russia did, in fact, invade our ally, Ukraine. So, Mr. Feinberg, would you agree that you have a role beyond just execution in offering some advice when you hear things that are just fundamentally inaccurate?
I do think the deputy should at times give his view on policy, for sure. I think it should be behind closed doors and not in public. And I think it's important for the deputy to understand that he, regardless of what his opinion may or may not be, that ultimately the secretary and the president will decide what the policies are, and it's important to execute it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Yeah. Mr. Feinberg, did Russia invade Ukraine?
Well, going to my behind closed doors statement a second ago, I'll just say this.
They moved tanks and troops and armored personnel carriers across the Ukrainian border. It's a pretty simple question.
Yeah. Well, here's how, if I may, I'd like to
If
say,
you would ask the chairman of this committee if Russia invaded Ukraine, I'm pretty sure, the Republican chairman, I'm pretty sure I would know the answer.
I got you. However, there's a very tense negotiation going on now. It's important for American interests. I don't have
Mr. Feinberg, we've got to live in the real world here.
Yeah, but I don't.
I mean, things happen, and it's obvious to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I think it's obvious to Europe right now that we just blew up an alliance. And for us not to be able to say an obvious fact it doesn't help a negotiation.
Well, what I was trying to say, Senator, is I don't think some person who's not informed on this, not involved in discussions, should make statements public that could undermine what the president and the secretary's intent is. I do have confidence that President Trump is very strong at negotiation, has a plan, and that he will find a good outcome for America.
Mr. Feinberg, people that are good at negotiations do not give up their two strongest negotiating points before the negotiation starts, which was membership in NATO and land that was taken away from the Ukrainians. So I do not agree with that he's a good negotiator. He actually, this week, has been a pretty bad negotiator.
Well,
I want to make sure.
Actually, President Trump, you know, his policy has always been peace through strength, and he is very cunning on how he proceeds and how he approaches these. He's the first person to ever bring Russia to the table where we are close, potentially, to a settlement. So I'd like to see how it works out. I have confidence it will work out favorable to America.
Well, I do not share your optimism.
Understood.
Here. I mean, this is, we went into a negotiation giving up the two biggest points, and that is very troubling. And at the same time, in the same week, we blew up an 80-year alliance. And some of my Republican colleagues have a hard time even stating the obvious, that Russia did, in fact, invade Ukraine 3 years ago. I know, Mr. Feinberg, I know you pay attention to the news. And I imagine if I asked you this question 3 years ago, I'm pretty sure I know what the answer would be. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. I recognize myself. Mr. Feinberg, thank you for being here. Thank you for your family, even those who are watching, your father, and for your family's years of service. I appreciate their introduction.
I was disappointed to hear earlier that some of my colleagues characterized your background in the private sector as negative. I think that's disappointing. I've got a different perspective, a positive perspective on that. There was a time in this country when business leaders were applauded for their patriotism and their contribution to our country's efforts to win World War II. And Mr. Feinberg, if your father is tuned in at this point in the hearing, I want to thank him personally and his generation. They also helped us in the Cold War, but to reform the DOD, I think we need someone who can work alongside the Secretary, harnessing the American spirit to ensure the United States outpaces our adversaries. Someone who knows how to reform organizations, improve outputs, harness innovations. So not only, Mr. Feinberg, do you have extensive background investing in sectors critical to national security, but you also served on the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. So thank you for that. So in this position, you had a front row seat to the threats that our country faces. So, Mr. Feinberg, can you discuss how your business background and service on the Intelligence Advisory Board makes you well suited to serve as the Deputy Secretary of Defense?
Well, it was an interesting job. It didn't have a lot of ability to act, but we did a tremendous amount of analytics. Every department of all the areas of DOD, all the intelligence agencies, Homeland, FBI, even at times Treasury and Commerce when they affected national security. We got briefings from all of them, had over 3,000, I took over 3,000 briefings. Fortunate to have on that board General Mike Hagee, who was former Commandant of the Marine Corps, as well as Charlie Allen, who's an intelligence legend, served and I guess he retired from CIA at 75, So we had a real good group of people I was fortunate enough to learn from. And all these problems and shortages and issues were laid out for us. So it was an incredibly educational job, very frightening. And I think that laid the groundwork. We, as a DOD and intelligence contractor, we've had a lot of classified contracts, but this was so much broader and in some ways, as broad as education as you can get.
Thank you for that. And again, thank you for your service on that board. So how can the military better harness American ingenuity and innovation to get emerging technologies into the hands of the warfighter faster?
The government doesn't truly understand the private sector, and the private sector doesn't understand the government, okay? Our companies I wish they were more patriotic, and they should be all in and always helping us, but they're not. I wish they could understand that there's certain rules in government that are not made by the existing sitting people in government, but they're just there, that they have to work by. Love to get our private sector to be more flexible, but I do think it's people that really understand private sector, that understand how the boards think, how the general counsel thinks, what the legal impediments, the regulatory impediments are. We need to bring them into DOD, have them lead in these conversations with our private sector. The big tech companies have done great things for America. They can do an awful lot more. We have to understand them, what drives them, and go to them with those thoughts, and I hope they'll also be more flexible. There's a world of opportunity for our private sector, like China's doing, way better than us. So it's a big area we need to get at.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Another issue, that the PPBE process, or the Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution Reform Project, we talked about that in the office. Will you commit to implementing PPBE Reform Commission recommendations endorsed by the department?
Yes.
Thank you. So if confirmed, do you commit to frequently updating Congress on your plan for the Replicator Initiative and counter UAVs at large?
I do.
Thank you for that. That's an important, Senator Schmidt mentioned that earlier in regards to the swarming technology and Replicator, so a very important program. I hope you'll pay significant attention to that.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Great.
Senator Slotkin.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Mr. Feinberg. It was good to talk to you in my office. I think there was a lot of things that we can agree on. Acquisition reform, if someone can crack that code, we'd be so much safer and so much better off vis-a-vis China, getting China out of our supply chains, for national security reasons. So I think there's a lot of things where I appreciated your views. My questions, as again I previewed in our conversation, are just about you managing the Pentagon and managing this huge enterprise, and particularly in basically you serving as the chief operating officer of one of the biggest institutions in the world, and allowing others outside the Pentagon to access sensitive information. I'm a CIA officer, so I'm putting these pieces together and what we've seen, and I just have to say that we know that DOGE is going into departments and agencies collecting data. We know that they are using AI-supported software, accessed through the Microsoft Cloud, to amalgamate that data. We know that they are feeding sensitive information into that system where they go, and that's information can be manipulated, swept up in cyber attacks, leaked. It's personnel information, it's sensitive information about our national security architecture. And we know that DOGE has reportedly brought in their own servers, particularly into OPM, in order to handle this data. Mr. Hegseth has said that he welcomes DOGE into the Pentagon. We know that they have started to look at places like CIA because they just sent an unclassified email with CIA recent hire names in an unclassified space. As a former CIA officer, you just blew the cover of someone who was going to risk their life abroad to protect our country. So my question to you is, what are you going to do when they come to you and they ask for that data? Will you give DOGE access to sensitive, classified, and personnel data of uniformed military bases and locations across the world?
Yeah, I mean, as deputy, if I make it there, we have to follow the laws, and we can't allow classified data that is not legal to be in other people's hands to move. So we'll look at the laws closely. We'll make sure that transfer, if it happens, is done by the appropriate ways. Now, of course, the president can decide what is classified and what isn't, and he can declassify. So, of course, always subject to what the president wants to do and his wishes. However, I think it is our job to look at this carefully and make sure it's done properly.
So separate from classified information, although you've stated that the president can just declassify things, will you give access to DOGE to sensitive personnel information about our uniformed military and families, particularly living abroad?
Make sure that all the necessary laws and regulations are met.
I just think, maybe it's because I come from the national security world. Do you know how appetizing it is for our adversaries to have this data? Do you know how appetizing it is for them to understand how to get at a uniformed officer living in a dangerous place? It just is, it's not for me actually a political issue. It is quite literally an issue of safety and security. And as someone who have served abroad, this is, to me, an issue of major vulnerability.
Senator, I will say, to your point, that in my past, I've had compartmentalized programs and access for a long time. So I understand the issue completely. I understand your concerns, and I will look at it closely.
I just think that I don't doubt your interest. But again, these are the conversations that are going to happen in the dead of night when no one here in our committee is watching. You're going to get a call at 7 p.m. that a bunch of 25-year-olds who have never seen classified data in their life, who don't understand what personnel and base data could do in the hands of our adversaries, are going to get a hold of that, and they're going to come to you, and you're going to have to press the button. And all I have to say is we are counting on you, and our national security is counting on you to push back, have a spine, and say no.
Understand the issue.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Slotkin. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feinberg, congratulations on your nomination to serve as the Deputy Secretary. And certainly I'm happy we had a chance to meet in my office and talk about a variety of issues, including some of my concerns and focus areas for the Department of Defense. I enjoyed learning about your priorities for the DoD moving forward as well. And during our meeting, you mentioned AI modernization and strengthening signals intelligence in particular as some of your top priorities. So we certainly both share the same concerns about China's technological abilities and an assertive PRC, sponsored cyber actors that are really engaging against us on an ongoing, regular basis. So my question for you, sir, is if confirmed, what policies or initiatives would you change or initiate to ensure the DoD stays at the tip of the spear for signals intelligence? And two, how will you ensure the continued focus on our foreign adversaries like the PRC?
Signal intelligence is an interesting point. I think there's significant risk in our ability to continue being successful in that collection. It's probably a better conversation for us to have in a SCIF, but I think that is an incredibly important issue that has to be very carefully addressed. On the PRC side, I'm sorry, Senator, what was your question? I apologize.
Just how do we stay focused on them, particularly with signals intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, it's key collection tool. Our methods and means and capabilities are good, but there is risk, both from technology point of view as well as how we approach it. Tough to talk about in a public forum. It is something I do have a fair amount of knowledge. I'd love to talk to you in a different setting.
Okay, well, I'd love to follow up with you on that because I do believe it is critical, and I know that it is a priority for you.
Absolutely.
We want to make sure that we have the resources and the knowledge necessary to deploy effectively.
Yeah, and collection for us, especially on foreign technologies and knowing where they stand, is super important to know where we have to spend.
Right.
And if we don't have that, we're going to spend everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. So specifically, artificial intelligence is at the top of that list as well. My question for you is, what policies or initiatives would you believe will lead us to ensure that our warfighting capabilities are developed not only for lethality, which is critically important, but also deployed responsibly, lawfully, and with appropriate safeguards for monitoring the procedures being used by these weapon systems?
Yeah, how you use AI is a tough balance, tough problem, because on one hand, if you don't have the effectively the authorities to use it, we won't be as lethal. But then using these authorities at times creates those kinds of problems. Boy, that's a tough one. We got to carefully look at it in detail. Look, for example, we're very strong on offensive cyber. What should the great capability, not as good on defense? What should those offensive cyber capabilities, because it's a great asset of ours. You know, I look forward to working with you and other senators on that right balance. And I think those conversations are best in a SCIF. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Another topic for us in the future, if confirmed.
Yes, sir.
Currently, the Air Force is programmed to lose about 1,000 planes without replacement. This will further exacerbate the Air Force's current state of being the oldest, smallest, and least ready, perhaps in its history. Aviation leaders are characterizing this move as, quote, a death spiral, and commented that no enemy has done so much to harm the Air Force than the impact of arbitrary spending reductions. And yet, crewed aircraft were not exempt from Secretary Hegseth's directive to scrub 8% from non-lethal programs. Luckily, core readiness and the defense industrial base were protected areas in that cut, but I think it sends a conflicting message on the future of the Air Force fighter planes and missions. So my question for you, sir, is if confirmed, you'll be charged with executing Secretary Hegseth's priorities and helping him align the total force toward the country's national security objectives. Can you help give this committee some reassurance that the leaders at OSD understand the need to continue investment in next generation tactical fighters so that we can improve readiness and in the process surpass our adversaries?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. Some believe that we can go straight to full autonomous systems. We don't need a next generation fighter, and we could use the F-35 updated to meet as a strategy. Others feel we really need the next generation fight, despite its expense and difficulty. I'm not, subject. I don't have the classified briefings, nor do I have the classified briefings on China's J-20, which I think is an important consideration in that. But I do pledge to you that, if confirmed, I'll get right in the middle of those facts. Ultimately, that might be the Secretary's or the President's decision, but I look forward to working with you on that.
But you plan to dive in and offer concrete suggestions?
Absolutely.
Good.
And my opinion on what I
Right.
think we should do.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I got a promotion. I've got the gavel now. Hey, thanks for serving the country yet again and being willing to do this. It's an incredibly important role, so thanks for taking it on, and for your family, because I know it's a big sacrifice for them.
Thank you for your service.
Would you run your business like they run the DOD right now?
No, but I've had my bad days too.
Yeah, I think we all have. So, well, first off, our nuclear triad was designed and built in the 1950s and 60s, and it's definitely suffering from I would call antique equipment. What are your thoughts on how we can upgrade that and make sure it's ready for a 21st century adversary?
Oh boy, it's super important. It's a tough one. We're way behind. We're way over cost. We're way late. I think we got to bring the best manufacturing and operational people in America on site. Have a heavy recruitment team to work with some of the great people in the Pentagon that understand it, and really have an enormous, detailed, programmatic, focused, operational act line by line. What are we going to do? A, B, C, D, E, F, G in detail. I don't have an immediate answer other than let's get the right people on the ground. Let's go at it, look at it with incredible urgency. Let's put a plan together and start getting at it.
Now, I think one of the most important aspects of your role is going to be the overhaul of our acquisition system. I know it's been talked about ad nauseum today, but I think very specifically there are products and capabilities that exist on the shelf that could be bought commercially that have been developed at risk by private companies. And I think one of the biggest errors we made in the last half century in the American defense acquisition process is the government is paying to develop technologies based on specifications that are oftentimes based on past conflicts, and those specifications lag battlefield need, and by the time that equipment is fielded, it's either obsolete or just doesn't work in the first place. So I'd be curious, how do you intend to reform the acquisition system, and are you going to be able to heavily focus on commercially acquiring capabilities that already exist and commercially acquiring technology that's on the shelf already?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity on COTS and all the different commercial capabilities, but some of the programs, restrictions, requirements make it impossible for companies to compete with larger defense companies who don't have that capability. They end up being a sub, and they get stuffed as a stub. I think DOD really has to look past the prime contractor, look into what the subs are doing, and take an active role in that relationship, and not rely on the big contractors because they simply can to run these programs simply because they win the overall general contracting bid. We got to get into the programs, the detail of each program. What are our most important programs? What are we missing? Why are we behind cost? What technologies do the sub has that should be promoted, move forward? As a contractor, I got caught in the valley of death all the time. Better technology, no interest of the larger company to use it, doesn't help them, it's not profitable. I think DOD can get in the middle of that to a degree, not on everything, but there's a lot of opportunity to spur the innovation and capabilities of smaller companies, and we got to do it.
Looks like I've been demoted again. So our defense acquisition paradigm is very focused on engineering the highest quality technology and building it oftentimes in a vacuum to the highest engineering specifications. And that's led to a lot of high quality stuff, but oftentimes not a lot of quantity. Our Navy's the smallest it's ever been in modern history. Our Air Force, as we heard, is short on aircraft. There is a quality all its own in quantity. The ability to produce vast quantities to sustain a conflict and sustain supplying our warfighters has a quality all its own. And I think the concept that quantity in and of itself creates quality by iteration and by constant fielding and a very close customer feedback loop. Because in this case, our customer is not the procurement officer. Our customer is the lance corporal or the sergeant or the captain on the front line fighting that enemy. And I think we have to reorient the DoD back to the fact that their customer is not the contract officer. It's not the procurement executive. It's not the PEO that's organizing. The customer is the warfighter. And in the small time you have remaining, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do we return our ability to produce quantity quickly? And how do we ensure that what we're producing is what the warfighter actually needs?
Totally agree, and we better do this urgently because in developing autonomous capabilities, we're going to need mass quantities of drones with a central brain. If we don't achieve that, our national security is at risk. So you've seen it from the private sector. The requirements, I keep saying it, I apologize for repeating it, the requirements are gold-plated, rigid, inflexible. If a great technology or a great capability is out there and that company doesn't put in a perfectly compliant bid, they're thrown out, versus a compliant bid, which may not meet the technical needs. Let some of the program officers who are really good, let them run with it, a little bit more autonomy. Let them make some decisions on what's best for our country. Loosen up the requirements, make it more based on mission than technical. Less gold-plated, quicker, more nimble. Let's look at what requirements we need up front. The deputy better get into those requirements on the big programs in detail and not delegate that out to everybody else. It all starts with requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Sheehy. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am looking at a Fox News article dated February 24th, 2022, and it features Fox News commentator Pete Hegseth, and the headline is, Russia invades Ukraine in largest European attack since World War II. Can you tell me if Russia invaded Ukraine? Mr. Feinberg? I mean, Mr. Hegseth said it.
Yeah, I understand.
It's easy, yes or no. Did they invade Ukraine?
I don't feel that I should publicly comment in the middle of a tense negotiation when I'm not privy to the facts to undermine what potentially...
You're not privy to the fact whether or not Russia invaded Ukraine and started a war that's lasted for 3 years?
I'm not privy to the details of what's going on in the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, what the sensitivities are, what the president's trying to accomplish. So I'd be afraid to speak out of turn and undermine that. I do have confidence the president is very skillful at this, and he'll find the right way to help the United States. He's the first guy that brought Russia to the table to even begin a conversation, and I think
the president is kneeling down to Vladimir Putin. I cannot believe the commander-in-chief of the greatest military on the face of the earth in my lifetime is bowing down to Russia. Let me just change the topic.
I don't
First, I'd like to echo my colleagues in reinforcing my gratitude for the outstanding service of General Brown, Admiral Franchetti, and the other dedicated leaders who have been unfairly relieved in Trump and Hegseth's politically motivated purge of senior DoD leadership. Let me emphasize, this is not normal. The president does not typically replace nonpartisan generals and flag officers with his preferred choices. In fact, a president seeking to install loyalists among those who are supposed to give him the best military advice is highly concerning and dangerous, both to the good order and discipline of the uniformed services and to the country as a whole. Mr. Feinberg, we had a productive conversation the last time we met, and I actually enjoyed it very much. And I appreciate your frankness during that conversation. And I would like to reiterate my expectations for you should you be confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense. Given the utter lack of qualifications of Secretary Hegseth, who himself admitted he was going to hire people smarter than himself to help run the department, you will be the brains behind his leadership and lack of experience. You will be solely responsible for managing the budget and day-to-day operations of the DoD, and so it is imperative that you demonstrate to this committee and to the American people your ability to provide the stability, expertise, and leadership necessary to ensure that Secretary Hegseth doesn't run the department aground with indiscriminate budget cuts and unprecedented politically motivated and deeply damaging purges of highly qualified senior DoD leadership. Mr. Feinberg, I have asked this of every nominee before this committee, including yourself in my offices. If President Trump or Secretary Hegseth asks you to do something illegal, will you refuse to obey an illegal order?
I won't obey a legal order, and I don't believe either the Secretary or the President will ask me to do that.
Thank you. Should you observe misconduct that is unbecoming or unlawful, will you report it?
Yes.
Thank you. Like I said earlier, you are it. You are second in command. The responsibility of an executive officer in the military is not only to execute their commander's vision, but to be a voice for his staff and manage the ins and outs of his command. Mr. Hegseth will not manage the minutia. You will. Mr. Feinberg, I would like to know, what are you going to do if the Secretary of Defense orders the pausing of a program critical to the readiness of the services?
I'm sorry, Senator, orders? What?
A pausing of a program that is critical to the readiness of our military services.
Obviously, I work for the Secretary of Defense. If he does something that I think is a real problem, I will tell him. I will give him my view. Ultimately, I will follow the chain of command and execute what he wants, as long as it's lawful. I do think that he will make good decisions. By the way, Senator, I also hope that we can hire, if confirmed, a ton of people, a heck of a lot smarter than yours truly. It's great to bring in talent.
It doesn't take a lot to be smarter than our Secretary of Defense and be more qualified, so that's a low bar indeed. Many of our recent nominees have been talking about hypotheticals, but I'm glad that you're talking about some of the decisions that are being made. Mr. Hegseth has already shown a willingness to make some bad decisions. I mean, he ordered DOD to hastily propose an 8% across the board budget cuts to the budget, while exempting non-mission essential expenses like the DOD's activities on the southwest border. Mr. Feinberg, the DOD isn't a place where we can afford to make mistakes. Are you going to allow an inexperienced team of software company interns to look at our most critical defense programs and make decisions that may impact our national security? Who's going to be at the wheel?
I'm sorry,
Are you going to let DOGE in there and start making cuts?
So at DOD, and the Secretary said this, we are responsible for our own people. We are responsible for our actions and policies. DOD is in charge of itself. So no, DOGE is not in charge of DOD. We're looking forward to working with Elon Musk. He has great expertise and talent, his great understanding of so many different things in DOD. He'll provide counsel and advice. We are looking forward to hearing that. But in the end, DOD is accountable to itself, must make its own decisions for its people and its policies, unless, of course, the president says, I want you guys to do this or that, and then, of course, we're going to do it.
Unless it's illegal.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Feinberg, thank you for your incredible sacrifice that you're willing to make for our country and serving in this role. There's already good news. President Trump asked Secretary Hegseth and yourself and others to go to the Pentagon and shake it up. Make the Pentagon focused on the warfighter and preparing to fight and win wars instead of focusing on itself, a large bureaucratic blob that just day to day feeds itself rather than the mission of what the Pentagon should be doing. And the good news is that after 4 years of a historic recruitment crisis, the worst recruitment crisis in the over 50 years of an all-volunteer force, the Army has already reported since Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, those recruitment numbers have shot through the roof. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess it does show there is a spirit, there is morale may be improving, and that based on the president's leadership and what he said to the American people, and hopefully if we can pursue sound policies and execution and making some changes to improve DOD, that will increase morale more. That's what I've seen in the private sector, and we'll have even a greater recruitment drive in the future.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And lots of good signs across the board of early signs of us succeeding in a big way on recruitment. One of the areas that I am concerned about, though, and we talked about this in my office, China is beating us in a lot of areas, and one area is in hypersonics. I mean, 4 years ago, they launched a hypersonic ballistic missile. It orbited the full Earth, entered the Earth's atmosphere, narrowly missed its target. We didn't know about it until it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. We still have yet to launch a hypersonic missile of our own. As we talked about in my office, Purdue University, Notre Dame in Indiana, Crane Naval Surface Warfare Center on the front lines of hypersonics research, and and development. How important is more investment in hypersonics to the United States?
Huge problem. We're underinvested. It's essential for our national security. I don't understand the thought process in the last administration, which didn't have it at high importance. I mean, and again, I'm not the person to be setting and making policies. My job would be to execute development, faster development, with reasonable cost and quickly of hypersonic capability. But at the same time, I mean, if you're totally reliant on your nuclear capabilities because tactically you're slower, if you don't have hypersonics, that's a diplomatic nightmare. And from a nuclear perspective, if the enemy's faster than you, boy, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So we got to get on that.
A big problem. You will be tasked with, as Secretary Hegseth's deputy, with shaking up the acquisition system at the Pentagon. Have you put a lot of thought into that? I mean, your background is so perfect to go there and change the way acquisitions are done at the Pentagon. And have you given some early thoughts about what you're going to do on day one to change it?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts, and worked in all our DOD companies closely with the Pentagon, so we have a decent knowledge of what's going on and how to improve it.
Good. You're incredibly qualified for this role. I look forward to working with you and partnering with you and Secretary Hegseth and others to make our military as strong as it can possibly be. Your background is perfect for the role. You have my full support. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further questions? If not, let me just say, I think we've seen a display of super competence and intelligence and capability today, and I feel very, very good about the role that you will fill, Mr. Feinberg. Today's hearing is concluded. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony and for the information of members. Question for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. We are now adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Reed. Thank you.